Welcome, everyone, to the Fandom Podcast Network special presentation of the Hair Metal Podcast. Hair Metal Podcast looks back at the thrash, glam, and pop metal bands, music, and events, and everything that heavily influenced the 80s and early 90s hair metal movement. We are proud to discuss the lifestyle, the music, and the nostalgia of 80s hair metal. And in this episode, I'm really excited because we're going to be discussing Van Halen for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, their awesome 1991 album. And we're also going to be discussing the 2024 upcoming Sammy Hagar Van Halen tribute tour. And we're going to be discussing a little bit of David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar. But you know I can't do this alone. My name is Kevin. And before we head to the Hollywood Sunset Strip, hit up Gazzari's, Troubadour, Roxy Cat House, Whiskey A Go-Go. Maybe we get hungry, need our drinks on at Rainbow Bar and Grill or Rock and Roll Denny's. I need my crew with me. And joining me is Mr. Michael Simmer. What's going on, buddy? Oh, wait, hold on, dude. You're muted there.
Sorry, Ken.
There you
go. Doing well. Up a little late last night for the Kiss show, but we're here and ready to rock.
We're going to talk about that shortly. But first, we got to introduce someone who I know very well and is the reason why we're here right now. Right here, right now. Kyle would appreciate that. Kyle Wagner, he is he's my brother, by the way. One of my brother from another mother, one of my favorite people in the world, my best friend, and also co-founder of this Fandom Podcast Network. Kyle, welcome.
Thank you. I just have to say right now, youth is king. Right now is the appreciation of an album. Right now, this podcast is kicking ass in America.
Okay, Kyle, I got to ask you. So the reason why we're here talking about this album is because of you. You had wanted to come and guest on the Hair Metal Podcast because for those of you that don't know, Kyle and I created this Fandom Podcast Network, and we have many shows under its umbrella, so to speak, because we're fans of a lot of things. We have Star Trek, Star Wars, Highlander, movie podcast, Doctor Who, you name it. We cover it all here. And of course, this Hair Metal Podcast. And you're like, dude, I really want to talk about Van Halen's For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Quickly, tell me why you want to talk about this.
When this album came out in 91, I was kind of for some reason, this album just hit me. I was a sophomore going into junior year of high school. And just how this album hit and how, it felt like it was kind of a bit of the dying days of hair metal in a way. The grunge movement was starting to percolate in and get more moving into the mainstream culture. Hair metal, a lot of the bands had gone on breaks, whether to go into rehab, go into the hospital, the detox, or just kind of not going on the road. And then here comes Van Halen with this, in my opinion, amazing album, one of the most powerful and impactful music videos we had seen in a very long time. And it was just, I think for Van Halen, it was one of their main apexes in the history of the band. And they were everywhere because of this album. And I mean, it won multiple MTV Music Video Awards for Right Now. It was just, and it hit me like, this could be the last. At the time, you're thinking because of how the music scene is changing, you're getting into hip hop, you're getting into rap, you're getting the grunge movement to come up. Could this be one of the last great hair metal albums?
Interesting. Well said. Mike, I wanted to get your quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of that stuff. When it came out, things were so much different for me musically. Grunge hit, thrash metal was sort of taking over. because hair metal was dying, and I was getting more into Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, a lot of the harder stuff because hair metal had sort of run its course. I was even sort of getting into some gangster rap, which was coming along. NWA came out a little bit before that, so this sort of it was sort of like the last. I'm not going to say the last hurrah. That makes it sound a little bit too much, but it was a good album. I'm not going to say great. It was a good album, but looking back on it, just like I did the last couple weeks, there's some genuine, amazing things going on in this album, which I didn't see originally because of the time period it came out. And at the time, it was just sort of, okay, here's another Van Halen album, and it didn't hit as much as when you look back at it now and say, whoa, there's some amazing things going on in this album.
That's a great point, Mike, and we'll touch on that a little bit more. As I mentioned, too, at the top of the show, we're going to also be discussing the Sammy Hagar upcoming tour, the Van Halen tribute tour. And there's some information about that. What looks like the band Loverboy is going to be opening up for it. And it might be your last opportunity to really see a lot of these Van Halen songs being played by, well, what's left of the original members for a long time. And so we'll discuss that a little bit more coming up here. But one of the things that I did want to talk about real quick is what we talked about last episode, Mike, was that we had the 80s rock and metal bands that should have been bigger. That was Hair Metal Podcast, episode 20. That was a lot of fun. Learned stuff about Honeymoon Suite I did not know about. What kind of feedback did you get on your end on that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of family, friends listened to it, really enjoyed it. One of the feedbacks that I got that was very funny was a friend of mine said, "You've been studying for this podcast for about 40 years." And even my wife, before we did the podcast, before we did it, she said, "Do you have notes down? Do you do research?" And I said, "No, I didn't need to research. This is things I said, "You should know better than anybody else. I know."
Did your wife go like, finally you have a vessel to talk about all this
finally,
stuff?
She's probably thinking, finally, I don't have to hear him talk directly to me about this stuff anymore.
Well, I want to give you props, Mike. First of all, that was a great show, and I'm looking forward to having you back. Kyle enjoyed it too. There you go. But you came up with a great idea here for our next show, and I think this is great. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to the year of 1989, and we're going to set this in a realistic time zone, basically in a time era. And we're going to draft, like the NFL draft. We're going to draft our hair metal supergroup draft. And we're going to pick 5 band members. We're going to pick 1 singer, 1 bass player, 2 guitar players, and a drummer. And what we're going to do is we're going to pretend we are like a super, let's say a super manager like Doc McGee. And we have to put together a super group, pull these guys. We're going to record an album and go on tour. Maybe we're going to support some charity, but we're not going to be busted for drugs and have to do a charity concert in Russia. So, Mike, I just want to say good job on that. I'm looking forward to talking about that. That's going to be fun.
Thanks. It'll be a lot of fun.
All right, guys. Hair Metal Podcast. Here we go. Mike, you did something very hair metal-y, very rock and roll, and I'm a little jealous of you. You went to go see Kiss last night, literally last night of this recording. Please tell us about this show.
So I live in Philadelphia, so getting to New York City is rather easy. So I wanted to go originally on the Saturday night, but ticket prices are ridiculously out of control. So went with my wife there, picture there. She rocked the makeup. Couldn't be prouder for rocking the makeup. It was incredible. Went with 2 coworkers of mine too, who are hair metal and Kiss fans. And it was a really great night. I will let on, no spoilers because it's not really a spoiler. They didn't do anything different than it was just a regular concert. Same set list that they usually do. Didn't change the set list at all. No guests came out. Nothing really special. It was just like a regular concert, which is a Kiss concert.
Did anyone open up for them?
Yeah. Paul Stanley's kid opened up for him.
Nice.
A band called Amber Wild. They weren't bad. They weren't bad. I mean, they had some fun songs. We went to the Kiss pop-up store, got my Kiss pop-up store T-shirt.
Very nice.
And the Kiss pop-up store was about 4 blocks away from Madison Square Garden. We had to wait in line for probably about 35 minutes to get in. A lot of memorabilia, a lot of costumes, a lot of boots. And then they had a merch room downstairs, and a lot of it was already sold out. There was only about 2 shirts left. A lot of the high ticket items were already were available. We're talking $300-400 shirt jackets. And it was just a really great show. But like I said, it wasn't really anything special. If you wouldn't have known this was our second to last show, you would have never figured it out.
But this is Madison Square Gardens. They're from New York. This is a big deal. There must have been some old school fans there. It must have felt like a homecoming for them.
It did. And they commented on that. They said Paul told a couple stories about this is where we started. When we first played here, and I think 77 when they first played at Madison Square Garden, he was talking about that. It was you could sense in the crowd the excitement that people felt from it, knowing that it was the second to the last show. And it was very cool in that sense because people really felt, and everything that came out, people were grabbing. They were balloons that came out. People were fighting over the balloons because people really felt that it was the last time. The merch table was out of control. The line was just ridiculous. And a friend of mine who went with us, he bought a bunch of stuff, huge Kiss fan. And he bought a bunch of stuff, and we sat down in our seats. All of that stuff was already on eBay.
Wow.
It was already on eBay. He bought a $50 poster, and we saw it on eBay for $500 in about 15 minutes.
Jeez, that's amazing.
Already on there.
What was the last song they played?
They did Rock and Roll All Night, Party Every Day. And then as they were leaving, they did a bunch of bows and running around. And that's when you kind of felt like it was something different. It was something special because Paul and Gene, you could see them getting kind of emotional there. When they were doing their good nights and they were doing the bows in front of the audience. That's when you felt that they looked a little different. They weren't in character. That's when you could see that it was a little bit different. We got some armbands.
Nice. Oh, those are the ones that light up and synchronize, right?
Yeah. These are the ones that light up, and people were grabbing them and fighting over those. Because, like I said, everything that said, because it has the date on it,
right?
So everything and anything that had the date on it, people were scarfing up like crazy. I mean, when we were leaving, the merch stand was still 200.
It was like a Kiss Hunger Games.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. And I think, they had crazy merchandise, jackets that were at the show, jackets that were $300. There was a $300 jacket, like a satin jacket, that was on eBay for $800 in 10 minutes.
Wow.
We just kept on refreshing the eBay page, and just every time you refresh it, there was more stuff on it.
Wow. People recouping those tickets, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but a great show. Super.
That's
glad.
awesome.
Yeah, and the train back stopped way too often. Got home super late, but it felt like 1989 again.
Well, I want to give you props first of all for making this podcast because I was just like, I didn't realize you were going to the show. I thought you were like getting tickets or something. I didn't realize you're actually going to the show. And then when you all of a sudden I saw your social media, like, holy crap, he's at the show. So that was really cool. Yeah. So props to you, man. That's awesome.
I don't know what's going to happen tonight. There was many people talking about it last night, including
this is as of this recording on December 2nd, 2023. This is their last show ever.
Yeah, I mean that's they're saying. I think it's 50-50 that it's going to be last. I think what they're going to do is they're going to say this was our last tour. Right. I think they're probably going to do one-offs here and there.
They're setting up for their run in the Vegas Sphere. What
yeah.
That's awesome.
But it does look last night, and I've seen them a bunch of times, but last night it looked like Gene and Paul were done.
Yeah.
It really did. It looked like they were just done.
I wanted to share. I don't know all the details yet, so I forgive me on this. There's a good friend of mine who is he's a fellow Raider fan, and he started the Atlanta Raider Booster Club, and his name is Clint, but he's a huge Kiss fan, and he's part of some charity, and he and his son got to ride in Kiss's private jet, got to meet Doc McGee, and then go to the show and have front row standing room, whatever. Got to meet them backstage, got pictures. It was so funny. He was posting all these pictures and the video that they took and on the private jet. And when you said they looked like they were done, when I saw Gene Simmons sitting in a picture of him sitting in the private jet, he looked like he was done. But I got more excited. They got a picture of Doc McGee. I would love to pick Doc's brain, but anyway, I had to share that real quick.
Doc was there when they come out on stage. They show a video of them coming from their dressing rooms onto the stage.
That's great.
And they show that one of the things that really blew me away is there was between the front row and the stage, it had to be, not kidding you, 20 yards between the stage and the front row, and then there was sort of like a pit there with only about 10 people on each side of the stage.
Yeah.
So maybe that was, he was there, the people who did the private jet thing.
Yeah. I think this was for the Atlanta show, because maybe it was, I can't remember. It was one of the other shows recently that they did before this one. But anyway, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I got a chance to see Kiss once when they reunited with everyone in the makeup, and I got to say that was in the early 90s. Remember that?
Yeah, I think that was like 94, 95.
Yeah, I got to see that show, so I was happy that I did get to see that. And then I did see them. Actually, no, I saw them twice. One without the makeup earlier, so that was a lot of fun. I'm glad.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, they put on an amazing show. I mean, it really is an amazing show. Fireworks, fire. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it was well worth it.
Awesome. All right, guys, here we are. We're going to be talking about, for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, Van Halen's 1991 album. And then also we're going to be discussing the upcoming tour and more thoughts on that. But, guys, I have to ask you, because it is a hot button topic among fans, who is a better Van Halen lead singer, David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar? Now, Kyle, we do a Fandom Podcast Network fandom discussions all around the genres, Star Trek, Star Wars, some hot button topics there. Don't know if you know this, but hair metal and music also has very opinionated opinions and can get pretty nasty about certain topics. We're not going to do that here, though, but I do want to get your thoughts on this because I found this article, and it's by Screen Rant, which I'm not a huge fan of, but this guy did bring up some interesting stuff that I did want to put to the table with you guys. Is both legendary in their own right, who is remembered as the best frontman for the hard rock outfit Van Halen, David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar? Fans have debated this for years to decide who's the better rock star between the two, and here are some pointers. And he goes back and forth between each one. One, David Lee Roth was better. He was the OG member. Sammy Hagar was better. He was more melodic. Hagar's stint as a vocalist made the fans of the band realize how a band is supposed to sound in terms of an ensemble set. He essentially made the band sound like a team effort. This happened mainly because of his dexterity as a singer, his rhythm-first approach as a crucial, since it required the band members to be more involved in the sound. The fact that he prioritized melody over volume or antics was essentially that warmed fans up to him. David Lee Roth was better. His work with the debut album, way iconic debut album there. You can't ignore that. Sammy Hagar was better, a more spontaneous performer. David Lee Roth was better, had a more astute vision about the band. Sammy Hagar was better. His methods were designed to complement the band's sound. David Lee Roth was better. He was a better showman. Sammy Hagar was better. He was multifaceted. Remember, he had years of his own concert experience. He could play guitar and sing. David Lee Roth was better. He was cult. It's important to remember it was Roth's influence that made the way for the next generation of rock stars like Vince Neil, Motley Crue, and early Bon Jovi. Roth's mix of punk-inspired energy, dynamic vocals, and incredible looks made him an instant success in the 70s. He became one of the most successful lead singers, so much that so many fans believe that if he left the band, Roth was a bigger name than Van Halen since he had a loyal fan base. Sammy Hagar was better. He was a timely addition to Van Halen. So, guys, I want to get your thoughts. Kyle, I'm going to start with you. I know you're not a hair metal expert, but you've been around a long time to know the difference between these two guys. And I want to get your thoughts because Mike and I, we dive deep into this stuff. You not so much, but as a person on the outside watching this, what are your thoughts?
So when it comes to Van Halen, I'm of two mindsets because I've always the David Lee Roth era of Van Halen to me is more when I got introduced to Van Halen through my sister, my half sister. She was a fan. So when I was introduced, it was David Lee Roth, and then I think Van Halen became kind of my own. Like I really love Van Halen with Sammy there, and going back and experiencing this, I think the biggest thing with this debate is what each person did for the band. I think David Lee Roth was the right front man to start the band because of his showmanship, his antics. He is a great songwriter, musician in his own right. But I think when the egos at that point with David Lee Roth and Van Halen it became two things. It was inevitable because David Lee Roth wanted to be his own star. When Sammy comes in, I think Van Halen is a better overall band because Sammy lets everybody shine. I think we get the best of Eddie Van Halen during the Sammy Hagar years. I think
interesting. You're not alone in that.
Yeah. I think overall as a band, they are a better band with Sammy Hagar. But I think as far as becoming the legends of Van Halen, it's David Lee Roth.
Good job. Mike, got to get your thoughts on this. I don't know if we've actually discussed this, you and I, so this will be the first time me hearing your opinion on this. What is your take?
Yeah, I agree with some things on Kyle. I think that Dave left at the right time. I think that if they would have continued, Van Halen would have probably imploded and probably never. I think he just left at the right time, and Sammy coming along at the right time as well. I think it's two different bands. I think it's sort of comparing apples and oranges. It literally is two different bands. Dave is the way better front man. I've always said way better showman, way better front man. Sammy was a guitar player as well, so he was a little bit more tied down when he was on stage. Even for the picture there, you could see that. Dave was, I'll be honest with you, he was a horrible lyricist. I don't know who was writing the lyrics, but some of the lyrics are ridiculous of those first couple albums. Sammy was a much more gifted lyricist, so he was just what they needed at that time. If you held a gun to my head, I would say Dave is better, but not by a lot. It's just two different things. It really is. I mean, yeah, the first Van Halen album is iconic, is amazing. It's what every guitar player ever aspired to be. But OU812 and 5150 are amazing albums. I mean, just really good albums. There were some misses too with Dave. I mean, you listen to some songs on 1984 and they're head scratchers. And the band, you could tell in 1984 the band was kind of imploding. And since Dave is so hard to get along with, obviously, I think he needed to go.
Right.
He needed to go, and they needed to go in a different direction, and that was never going to happen if Dave was still in the band.
Kyle.
It was. So
I want to add into that too, because I think as far as a front man and performer, you're right. Like David is spectacular, but I think Sammy might have actually been the better vocalist because, and I know we'll talk about it a little later in this episode on the Right Here Right Now tour. They did do a few of David's songs. And I'll be the first one to say, I think, especially on Dreams on that particular album, Sammy performs it, and I think it's the best. It's a much better performance.
Oh, Sammy's a better singer. No doubt, Sammy's a much better singer. Dave was just a complete showman, not a great singer. Sammy was just a better musician, better singer, better lyricist. But it's just so hard to overcome those first couple Van Halen albums.
Yeah. They're iconic. I mean,
it just really is. So when you're comparing the two, it's so tough on Sammy. And Sammy's a class act from everything that I've read and seen about him. Just a great guy, whereas Dave is just so far out there. When you think about it, I always, David Lee Roth is the Antonio Brown of Van Halen.
That's a good comparison.
So, that is a football reference, sports ball reference for those of you that don't know, but those of you know.
When Antonio Brown was on the Steelers, he wasn't that bad. But then when he left the Steelers, you're thinking, oh my God, how did the Steelers ever put up with him? He's got so many issues. And then when you look back and you think, wow, Van Halen lasted a lot longer than they should have with Dave, because he was just so far out there. And put them all back together.
That's a great point. And I wanted to chime in here because I've heard all of the back and forth here, and both you guys have made great points. And this is a discussion I've actually had with my wife, Erin, for a while too, because she's more of a Sammy Hagar era fan, but she does appreciate and like what came before with David Lee Roth. And I can just say this: why not be able to like them both? If you have to ask who is the better frontman, of course, back in the David Lee Roth days, he kind of basically epitomized that. He showed you what a frontman should be, basically. But I think that for me personally, they're, like you said, Mike, it's almost like two different bands in a way, and that's not a bad thing. It's just bands evolve if they want to kind of stay relevant. Madonna has been able to do that back in the 80s through the 90s and early 2000s. Artists need to evolve and change and come up with new sounds. And one thing I like about Sammy Hagar is I was actually a fan of Sammy Hagar before he joined the band. I remember Montrose. I remember his solo stuff. I remember hearing heavy metal on the heavy metal soundtrack. And I was like, who is this guy? And so I was always a fan of Hagar. When he joined the band, I was like, this could be really good. And 5150 did not disappoint. That is a great album. And I almost feel like, as we touched on earlier, that Sammy kind of, I think, brought the band, made it into more of a band, and brought the best out of everything. And two, he also had the experience of business behind the music as well. And a lot of musical influence that I think he brought into the band. And you hear a lot of really cool stuff that Eddie Van Halen had never done before. He got different sound. And I even noticed it in the bass playing with Michael Anthony, the drums too, with Alex. I just felt like that he really brought it together as a band and made it work and brought the best out of them. And with his experience, I thought that really showcased in it. And I liked them both for separate reasons. If you have to ask me which one I liked more, I really can't say that, because I liked them for both themselves in their eras at their time. And I love the fact that I can go back and listen to how raw that first Van Halen album was. And, when I make the point that he, as in Sammy Hagar, maybe made Eddie Van Halen a better musician, you go, well, did you not listen to the first album of Van Halen, Kevin? How can you do better than that? Well, he did, in my opinion. He did a lot of really great musical things with his guitar, his singing, his piano playing, the melodies. There's a lot in there in the Sammy Hagar era that I felt that really was a beneficial to the overall band. So
I think that
Kyle.
Go ahead, Kyle.
I feel like we're missing out on some kind of extreme era of Van Halen.
Yeah, I'm not talking about Gary Sharon. Not that he was bad or anything, but we don't have enough we don't have enough Van Halen with Gary Sharon. So
it's okay, Kevin. You can say it was bad.
Yeah. I think, what you talked about, Kevin, is poignant, because I think Eddie needed Sammy, right?
Yeah.
I think he needed him at that point. Yeah. I think Dave wasn't a good enough musician to push Eddie. I think that Sammy pushed Eddie for all the right reasons, and Eddie needed that at that point because I don't think they were ever going to make a Van Halen one ever again. I mean, how could you, right?
Yeah.
And I also think it really comes down to this, and learning about Kyle and how old he was when For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out. It really comes down to your age too, right?
Yeah.
So if you grew up, with Hot for Teacher, and I was 14 when 1984 came out, right? So for me, it was all about Dave. And when Sammy came along, I had already been deep diving into Van Halen for years. But if you were coming of age when Sammy was there, for instance, my brother-in-law is a big Sammy supporter, but he's younger than me. He's like 5 years younger. He's like 5 years younger than me. So he was exposed. It really comes down to when you were exposed to Van Halen.
Yeah, there is definitely an age factor. And that's actually a good thing, Mike. And I'm glad you brought that up because it's nice that there's a younger generation that found out about the Sammy Hagar era because that was their Van Halen. They can always just go back and listen to the older stuff. But, I like that there is an age thing here. And I think that is one of the main topics of this. But I had to bring that up since we're talking about a Sammy Hagar album with Van Halen here with For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. And with that said, guys, let's go ahead and let's get into that right now. Van Halen, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. I wonder what that stands for. Well, before we get into discussion, guys, I got a couple little things I found out on iHeart.com by David Basner. He actually came out with this article last year. It says, Van Halen's For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, 14 things you might not know. And at the time, it was the 32nd anniversary. Well, this year, it is the 33rd anniversary release of Van Halen's 9th album, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. To celebrate the effort, here are 14 things you might not know about it. The album came out when censorship was a hot button issue, and Sammy Hagar was trying to push the envelope. He literally wanted to call the album F.U.C.K, but pulled back. Hagar's friend, boxer Ray Boom Boom Mancini, told him that the F word is actually an acronym for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, though it isn't. The bands decided it would be the name of the record. The phrase For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge was first used by the band Coven, the name of the song of their 1969 album, Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls. Number 4, the band worked on this album for 13 months, completing it in less than 2 months before it hit shelves. And I didn't know this, guys. 6 singles came off the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge album. I knew about 3 of them. Pound Cake, Right Now, Run Around, Top of the World, Man on a Mission, and The Dream is Over. Number 6, to create the intro for the opening track, Pound Cake, Eddie Van Halen held a battery-operated power drill up to the pickups of this guitar. Well, if you saw Pound Cake, you know that we all knew that. Pound Cake was the first single off the album and went to number 1 on the rock charts. That was number 7. And number 8, you might recognize the riff in the top of the World because it was the first part of the intro of the song Jump. Top of the World is actually played live after Jump for that reason. Number 9, Top of the World spent 4 non-consecutive weeks on top of the rock chart. It was the only single from the album to originally make it to the top 100, peaking at number 27. Right Now was re-released in 92 and peaked at number 55 on the Hot 100. Number 10, Toto's Steve Lukather provided backing vocals for Top of the World. 11, the instrumental track 316 is an homage to Eddie's son Wolfgang, who was born on 3/16 or March 16th. 12, Sammy thinks Right Now has the best lyrics he has ever wrote for a Van Halen song. He said that he was tired of penning cheap sex songs and wanted to get serious and write something about world issues. 13, in 1992 and 93, Crystal Pepsi commercials featured Right Now. Eddie allowed it because he knew if he didn't, the company would just hire studio musicians to cover it. And number 14, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge debuted at number 1 on the charts and stayed there for 3 weeks. Mike, did any of these jump out at you or surprise you?
No, I mean, I remember the Crystal Pepsi. I remember that advertisement. Now, Right Here, Right Now was huge. All those things that none of them really surprised me. Eddie was a strange person. When you read a lot of stuff about him, he had some. I mean, he was an amazing human being, but he had some odd opinions about things. I mean, I can't believe that he thought that they would just play the song with studio musicians. I mean, who? I mean, you just can't do that. You can't just take a song and say, "Oh, this is our advertisement." See, hearing that they did it in 2 months is pretty amazing as well.
Yeah.
I mean, when you hear the intricacies of the musicianship on this album, 2 months it doesn't seem like it seems like one song would be 2 months instead of
Kyle, your thoughts on the 14 things you may not have known?
I think a lot of those for people who were fans of Van Halen at this time are pretty well known, but I think for people who have just, they just get the album and listen to it and that's it. But this, I really think too, the other aspect with this album that brings up this is that we were just hitting a time where we were really starting to get into the behind the music of the bands and a lot of where MTV was getting more into the reality of things. Real World had been out now, and MTV was focusing a lot more on that. And I think because Van Halen during this time, because of the Right Here, Right Now music video and Crystal Pepsi advertising and everything that was circling around them, everybody was taking a look under the hood with Van Halen at this point, because they were predominant. They were everywhere in 91 and 92 with this. And I think there's more information about this album that's come out than probably any of their other albums.
That's a good point, Kyle. And I was thinking too, when I was reading these things, is I remember the Crystal Pepsi thing, and I think SNL did a funny skit on that with some weird liquid Pepsi thing. I thought it was kind of funny. I can't remember all the details, but I remember that song being everywhere. And Pound Cake, as soon as Pound Cake was released, though, I was in. I remember the video. I remember him using the drill. I just thought that was really cool. And it just there was something with the drums and the bass, and I'm sure Eddie was tuned down to the drop D. It was just like a really hard kind of crunchy sound. But then you bring on Sammy's vocals, and it just sounded great right out of the bat. I ended up buying it right away, just like everyone else did. So for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, often abbreviated as F.U.C.K, the top 3 singles, as we know, is Pound Cake. That was released in June of 91. Top of the World was released in September of 1991. And Right Now was released in February of 92. One of the things I remember now of Top of the World, because guys, remember, this was at the beginning of the Gulf War when they were going on tour. There was a lot of kind of patriotism going on as well. But I remember this was a popular song with like Air Force pilots. This was something that they kind of latched onto. And what's interesting too is like it's the last song on the album. And I keep going back between that one and Pound Cake, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the album was released on June 17th, 1991 on Warner Brothers Records. It was the third to feature vocalist Sammy Hagar, debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 album. The album marked a record in the band's history, seeing 7 of its 11 tracks released as singles. But more importantly, the album marked the first time the band had Ted Templeman working as a producer capacity since 1984 when David Lee Roth was a singer. He had, however, assisted in determining the track sequence for the 1986 effort 5150. The title of the album was an idea by Sammy Hagar, who wanted to push the issue of censorship. I wanted to kind of get your guys' take on that. Do you think it was a clever way? Because I didn't really get the censorship thing right away. It wasn't until later. Mike, I wanted to get your thoughts on the censorship. I get it. A lot of this was going on. We had the warning labels on records from the early 80s. Thank you, Tipper Gore. And there was a lot of censorship going on. I didn't catch that at first. I just thought it was a clever way to use the F word.
Yeah, I thought it was too, and it doesn't. I don't think it has a parental advisory sticker on it either.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, so that whole censorship thing is, we covered in my class a lot, and the kids are the students of today, or it makes them scratch their heads about what exactly the problem was. It was a ridiculous time. I just don't know if Van Halen should have been the ones carrying the torch against censorship, because they really were never censored, I don't think. So I'm not sure about that. I know when the album came out, I got the reference right away for the F.U.C.K. I got it right away, right?
Right.
As I think most people did. But I remember thinking back then, what you talked about earlier, I remember thinking back then, that's not really what that means. I don't think For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge is actually the origin story of that word. And I remember thinking it then, and it turns out it wasn't. And, of course, this is the days before the internet, where Sammy couldn't go on Google and find out if Ray Boom Boom Mancini was correct. But I always thought it was kind of odd that Van Halen was carrying the torch for the censorship when it should have been somebody else.
Yeah, that's a good point. But it was nice that they did in a kind of under the radar, so to speak, because not everyone got it right away. But I liked the effort. I thought it was good. And the picture that I have up here, of course, is Eddie Van Halen using the famous Eddie Van Halen painted drill for that sound that he got out of that, which I thought was really cool. And I want to ask you about this, Mike. You've played guitar, so I want to ask you about this. I want to mention one little blip that I found here about Eddie's sound and what he was using. It says this was the first album that Eddie recorded with his trademark Marshall Super Lead serving as the primary amplifier. This is for us music nerds. The Marshall was fading, so he went to his 1989 Soldano SLO 100 to record the album primarily. Through the Marshall was used sparingly. A prototype for what would become the PV5150 series of the custom amplifiers was also used. PV's release of the 5150 series coincided with the release of the album. And Mike, was this also the first tour we really started seeing Eddie Van Halen's PV custom guitars that he would now use throughout the rest of the Van Halen era?
Yeah, that's when the Frankenstrat sort of disappeared. He has the Franken drill there, but that's when the Frankenstrat sort of went away. Yeah, and he started using a lot of different guitars. Eddie was known for tinkering with everything,
right?
And taking apart guitars and putting them back together, and taking this out and putting that in. And he was famous for that. And I don't know, when he started playing these and went away from the Frankenstrat, I don't know if he stopped tinkering with things and stopped focusing so much on his sound and more on the musicianship, because you can definitely tell that difference between those early albums and this era about how he is a much better musician in these era than in this era than he was previous.
That's a great point, because I remember when he first started playing these exclusively, I thought they were kind of weird looking. And it was hard for me to get accustomed to it. And then as I kept seeing it and I saw him play them live, and I was going, man, I'd love to have one of those. And of course he would have his many different versions that he would play. And of course he had, what's that?
It was just weird to see him, because when you saw him every time before this, he had that Frankenstrat.
Yeah.
To see him with this, it was like, whoa, what? That doesn't.
But he did have his custom painted version of the PVs here, and obviously he had a really good relationship with PV. And I loved seeing these eventually. And I think when I see this guitar, it's Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah.
And outside, of course, his Frankenstrats and all those versions. But he was always tinkering. There's a great picture. Yeah. Of him doing that in the recently before he died. He's in the garage drilling on something and changing something. So yeah,
I can only equate it to a newborn baby seeing their freshly shaved dad, right? They know it's their dad, right? But it looks different because they shaved off their beard. So when you saw Eddie with that new guitar, you were thinking, well, that's Eddie, but what is with this new guitar?
Right. The critical reception. Rolling Stone's John Millward rated the album 2 out of 5 stars, explaining that it is so stuffed with zigzagging guitars and blustery vocals that it almost forgets to rock. Eddie Van Halen has more guitars than teeth, upends such a tackle box of hooks that they only start to surface after repeating listening. And then Gina Arnold of Entertainment Weekly gave the album a C and said it would be nice to believe that the acronym formed by the title of Van Halen's new top charting album was intended as a covert blow against censorship in America. In the Consumer Guide, Robert Gustow gave the album a dud rating, and retrospectively review in All Music Stephen Thomas was mixed. He stated the title indicates the true nature for Unlawful Carnal knowledge, backing away from the diversity of OU812. The band turns in some of the most basic, straightforward rock and roll music. He concluded that even though the band continued to be tight and professional, the songwriting is by large undistinguished, with the anthem Right Now standing out as the most memorable song of the batch, mainly because of this incessant chorus. I got to ask you about this, Mike. I don't remember bad reviews coming out. I didn't pay a lot of attention to the trades at the time because, back in the pre-internet days, you would pick up and read these in actual magazines and newspapers. I thought it had a pretty good overall fan reception anyway. Do you remember these kind of like so-so reviews?
Yeah, I don't. Although, it is a bit of a departure. It's a little more poppy than their previous albums. So I think maybe this is when people started to realize, okay, this isn't really Dave Van Halen anymore. This is a brand new band. When 5150 came out, people were thinking, okay, let's give this a try. Let's give it a whirl. It was really good. OU812 is sort of that middle ground. And then when this album came out, everyone's like, okay, it's a completely different band, right? Yeah. And I think that people didn't take well to it at first. Looking back on it, it's a great album. But I think at first people were like, this is way too new. And this is when people really had to come to grips with the fact that Sammy was in the band and they're moving forward with Sammy, and the Dave era is completely over. It's when people started to realize that this is what it's going to be from here on in. And I think that people had a tough time with that. I think people still were saying, with 5150 and OU812, people were like, oh, they'll get back with Dave. They'll get back with Dave. These are just one-offs. But by the time this album came out, people were realizing Dave's never coming back.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I remember there was talk of fans going, nah, Dave's going to come back. Dave's going to come back, because his solo effort kind of fizzled out for a while there. And yeah, that's an excellent point. I hadn't thought about that. Kyle.
I sorry about that. I had a little work issue. I had to step out, but I caught in on Mike's point here. People don't remember how much the Van Halen brothers could hold a grudge. Especially Alex.
Yeah.
And it was toxic between them and Dave. And it was just not going to happen. And then for this album to have 6 singles released and have, I think probably the biggest time for Van Halen to be part of the actual pop culture zeitgeist at the time. They had no reason to bring David Lee Roth back at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point, Kyle. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up too, when you talked about toxic, I remember recently watching an interview with Sammy about the reason why things got bad between him and the band. And I think it might have been on the Stern show. And he said basically what happened is that he was kind of leading the band. He was making a lot of the choices of where the band was going to go, where they were going to tour. He had so much input on the brothers. And it wasn't a bad thing at all, because you see how successful that it was. So, and plus he had years of experience on tour and promotion and songwriting and melodies. Sammy was one of the most important people in this band at the time. But when the Van Halen brothers brought in a new manager, the manager started saying, why are you letting this guy make all the decisions? This is your band. You're the Van Halens. You're Van Halen. And that's when the trouble started, because they started that's when things started to go bad between those guys. And so then, of course, as you said, Kyle, that might lead to, Alex and Eddie going, yeah, maybe they're right. I don't know if there was a money issue. They seem to all share that equally, but at least Sammy was able to stay friends with Michael Anthony going forward and such. But I thought, guys, that we would get into the track listing here. And of course, I did want to share this cool picture here of one of the early flyers of Van Halen on tour here. I thought that was kind of cool. But let's get into the track listings here. So all of the tracks are written by Eddie Van Halen, Michael Anthony, Sammy Hagar, and Alex Van Halen. And at number 1, first track is Pound Cake, followed by 2, Judgment Day, 3, Spanked, 4, Runaround, 5, Pleasure Dome, 6, In and Out, 7, Man on a Mission, 8, The Dream is Over, 9, Right Now, 10, 316, the instrumental, and 11, Top of the World, total running time of 52 minutes and 6 seconds. Kyle, I want to start with you. This album, we're doing this because of you, man, and this is a great choice for a podcast. Tell me about your favorite tracks on here. Any comments on the tracks?
There's about 5 for me really stand out tracks on here. Obviously, Pound Cake. What a way to start an album. Yeah. Great introductory song. You come in, you hear that sound of that drill firing up and everything. It's an amazing song. I'm a fan of Runaround. I think Man on a Mission is actually really good. Obviously, Right Now, Top of the World is, if you ever needed just a song to fire you up, Top of the World, I think is one of those. And I'm also a big fan of 316. I think it's just a great instrumental piece, and it just takes you to a different place. But there's really truly not what I call a horrible song on this album, in my opinion. There's some that are definitely better than others, but I mean, I think throughout it, there's at least every other song on here is a pretty strong song in one way or the other.
Gotcha. What about you, Mike?
I think the standout track, as always for me, was The Top of the World. I mean, it's a great sing-along song, upbeat, complete. I mean, would Van Halen have ever written a song like that with Dave? No. They never would have, right? Pound Cake is a rocker, although supposedly Eddie Van Halen stole the drill bit off of Paul Gilbert.
Paul Gilbert, yeah.
So, but hey, listen, it's Eddie Van Halen. I'm sure Paul Gilbert was like, I don't care. But Pound Cake's a great song. But really, for me, it came down to Top of the World. Just a great song that you hear now. And I always said that Van Halen they're a summer band, right? You don't listen to Van Halen in the winter. You listen to Van Halen in the summer with the sunroof down and the windows down, crank, and that's a song that you would do that with. It's just that song to me was everything on this album. I think everything, great songs, but I think everything is secondary to that song.
Yeah, that's a good point. For the longest time for me, Pound Cake was my favorite off this one. I love the video. I love the sound that Eddie gets in that, and the combination, of course, of using the drill. It's a gimmick, but I think he made it work. It wasn't just there to do it, but I know there's got to be a drop tuning on that thing, because the way that sounds, and with Alex's drumming and Michael's bass, it's just like, it's just a great driving song. And I love the melody and the notes that Sammy hits in that song. But it's competing right now for Top of the World for my favorite song. I've been listening to Top of the World a lot lately, ever since I've been obviously waiting to do this podcast. But this has been, I still have a car that has a CD player, if that tells you things. And I love the fact that I can pop this in. I've been listening to Top of the World so much right now, that might eclipse my favorite on the album right now. Judgment Day is a great song too, as well. Right Now, man, I love the way that song starts out, guys. And what's cool about it is that I think advertising took advantage of that, because I think it's like a good minute before the lyrics kick in. Kind of like how Metallica will start a song and they don't start singing until a minute or 2 minutes in, back in the older days. And I love that they did make a commercial song that wasn't, too hard, too soft, but I love the fact that he did lyrically go places with it. And I'll be honest with you, I'll tell you right now, I am not a fan of political bands. I don't want politics in my music. I try to stay away from politics. And so if you're going to throw a bunch of politics, anti this, anti that, I'm not going to listen to you. So I like, though, that he was able to still address some stuff that we do need to know about. Like when Billy Joel started, we didn't start the fire, that type of thing. That was cool, but it wasn't like, he did it with everything else. I just think overall, this might be the pinnacle of, I don't know, 5150 is really good, guys. I got to ask you. Oh, Kyle, did you have a quick question? Or quick thing?
Well, since we were talking about Right Now, because I think the other thing you have to tie into that is the Right Now music video.
Yes. Okay, well, let's talk about that.
Because that music video was absolutely huge, and people were raving about that music video for the whole year. It won the MTV Music Video Awards that year, and that video, in a way, was another video we just talked about, Kevin, on our Time Warp show. We were talking about Thriller in 1983, how it changed music videos. I think in Right Here, Right Now, the video for that actually changed a lot of things and how certain videos were done too, because you talk about political, they had messages within that video, but they did it in a way that it wasn't hammering you necessarily over the head with a political message. You enjoyed the song and you were just so amazed by this video they created and all the different things that they incorporated within this video, whether it was some political thoughts, their own personal thoughts, and different things. And it was so just amazingly well done. And I for my opinion, I think it's Van Halen's best video ever.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're hardly even in it, are they? I mean,
yeah.
I don't even know if they're in it at all. I'm trying to think back, and I should have.
There's a couple of scenes where they're in it, because there's a scene where it shows the four of them, and then it kind of shines on Michael Anthony because it says Michael. Right now, Michael's thinking about a solo project.
Right, yeah. But is there a like a performance video, performance part of them performing?
No, not in that video. None at all.
Yeah.
It's just, I think there's the live videos came out, of course, the concert videos and stuff like that. But yeah, it definitely was an important. I think it was an important video at the time. They were able to, just like Hagar's addition to the band was perfect at the time, in my opinion. And that song just hit a chord, and you still hear it all the time. It's one of Sammy Hagar's Van Halen songs that you hear probably most of, to be honest with you.
You know, when you hear it a lot is at sporting events.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
When they'd be introducing the team, it was like the lights go out, the song plays, they introduce the band or introduce the team. It was big with that. It was huge with that for a long time. I remember going to Penguin games in Pittsburgh, and that was their song for a while.
Yeah. I did want to let you guys know that we are going to read some comments from our Hair Metal Facebook group, because we had some members share their thoughts on that. But before we do that, though, Kyle, you kind of touched on it earlier. This album won some awards. It won a Grammy Award for 1991 Unlawful Carnal Knowledge for Best Hard Rock Performance. MTV Music Awards, 1999 winner Video of the Year, Van Halen Right Now. And it went multi-platinum as well. This definitely won some awards. The picture that I had of the band, I believe that is an American Music Awards award there, but that might have been a little bit later, maybe OU812. I can't remember. But anyway, it won some awards. Kyle.
Well, and this is also a time when winning that MTV Video Music Award Video of the Year still really meant a lot.
Yeah. Definitely. That was the biggest award, and I thought that was a huge accomplishment, acceptance of this era as well, brand new fans coming into the band. Mike, what were your thoughts on these awards? Do you remember this?
That put it perfectly. When 92 Video of the Year, that was big. I mean, if you held a gun to my head, could I even tell you what the video of the year was last year, or the last 5 years? And I'm exposed to a lot of new music just from my students, right? So they'll tell me, check this out, check that out, and I will. But I can't remember any of the last 5 video of the year, even a nominee, let alone the winner. I just thought that they're still doing the MTV Video Music Awards, which is crazy to me. But back then, it was a big deal. The shame of it is that should have never been nominated for hard rock performance. Why wasn't it just nominated for best album? That so infuriates me that somebody, they have to put them into a category, yet everybody else can be in 9 different categories of the Grammys. But
I know, right?
Anything even remotely rock and roll has to be pigeonholed into either metal or hard rock, and that's it. That you can't win 2 of them, and yet Beyonce's winning 9 Grammys over 9 different genre categories, right? And I never could understand that. There's no reason that album should have been just pigeonholed into best hard rock performance.
Yeah, I agree. It was a huge hit, but we've been, you could also get into the rabbit hole, which I don't want to do right now, of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So it's exactly.
Don't get me started. That podcast would be 10 hours long.
Yeah. Okay, now before we get into the tour and the promotion of this, I did want to give some love to the Hair Metal podcast Facebook group that we have, and we had got a lot of great fans of the genre there. And I put a post on our Facebook group, I wanted to ask their opinions on this album. And my friend JT said, I was second row center at Lakewood for this tour. I believe that was in Atlanta area. Not my favorite Van Hagar album, but I prefer Sammy to David Lee Roth a million times over. My good friend Shane says, I love this album. 1991 was a huge year for Van Halen. It was probably them at the peak with Hagar. This was the only Hagar album that Ted Templeman co-produced, and you could tell it was most Roth sounding of the 4 Hagar studio albums. I remember seeing them on this tour, and they were on fire. I had seen them once before with OU81 tour, and they were okay, but 1991 was their year. I listened to the CD many times during the summer of 91. Top of the World, Run Around, Pancake are still on my regular playlist this day. Right Now video, which won Video of the Year of the MTV Awards, was amazing, even if the song itself lacked a high-octane punch as the other singles. In the years since, I would have to say I still listen to the 5150 album the most of the Hagar albums. The album was a solid number 2 for me, with the other 2 not coming close to either. But overall, I was never a big Van Halen fan than I was during the F.U.C.K. era. It was great time to be a Van Halen fan. And he did follow up and saying, I will follow up and saying that I'm going to see the Hagar and Satriani on guitar tour. I'm specifically going to fly in to see the LA show at the Forum because this is really the end of it. Sure, Hagar sings a few Van Halen songs on his solo tours, but this will likely be the last time we will hear all these songs played live. I've seen Hagar solo twice. He's okay live. He's 76 years old and slowing down. He's not a wreck like Roth, but for me, this is the final. I said the same about the Motley Crue last year. The stadium tour was the last time I planned to see them. They sounded terrible. Then all the drama with Mick Mars happened, and I think that's a wrap for me. Same story here. I'm looking forward to one last great hurrah to celebrate Van Halen. I'm glad Hagar is doing this. It's sad that none of the remaining Van Halens are involved, but he says, but it is what it is at this point. I want to talk about his comments, Shane's comments there real quick. Mike, what do you think?
I think it's important about that, Sammy. When I heard this tour announced, I was like, do I really want to go? It's such a balance between, and the Motley Crue thing is a great thing to think of. I've never seen Motley Crue after Girls, right? Or no, I'm sorry, after Dr. Feelgood. So they will live on in my mind forever as Dr. Feelgood, right? Because I've never seen them live since, and they're such a huge disappointment. So I just don't know if I'll go to see this. And I know they're coming near here. And, you know, it's that thing of, do I want to go see them and be disappointed? Or do I want to see them one last time and say goodbye?
You know, I think the latter, Mike, I think the latter of what you just said is probably the main reason for this, to be honest with you. And we'll get into more of that tour coming up a little bit, but I did want to just touch on this. Kyle, did you have any thoughts on Shane's comments? Because I thought that was pretty poignant.
You know, I think the poignant part of that is that I hope before this tour gets going that there's some way for them, for Sammy and the surviving Van Halens, to find some peace. Because if nothing else, at the Forum tour, Alex should be there, Wolfgang should be there. I mean, he's doing this, and I'm sure, knowing some of the stuff, I'm kind of thinking Alex is probably thinking, hey, Sammy's doing this for the money. He's not. He's doing it because he wants to say goodbye to Eddie, and he wants to make sure that Eddie gets. And
he's doing this because no one else did it. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, look at everyone. Look at the two big shows they did when the Foo Fighters drummer passed away. You know, no one is putting together a big show or a big thing. He took it upon himself to do this, and we'll touch on that in a minute here, guys. I want to get to more some of these comments here. My friend Scott Harwin says, loved everything about this album. I remember listening to it while driving around Yellowstone. Great times. My friend Paul said, I'm a huge Van Halen fan, but not really with Sammy. I appreciate some of the stuff they've done and Human Beings. Not on this album is one of my faves. This being said, I hated this album when it came out. Later, some of the tunes grew on me, but Sammy always reminded me of Michael Bolton for some reason. Top of the World is the standout track to me nowadays. And speaking of, my friend Johnny Karzai, as we both know, actually all three of us know, he says, it just wasn't what I was listening to at the time. It felt too tame for me, more like a heavy Michael Bolton album. He laughs with the laugh emoji. Over the years, I've come to love Sammy and appreciate him so much more now, especially his later solo stuff. Also, Pound Cake is the most overrated, gimmicky Van Halen song of all time. Jackal did the Power Tool gimmick better.
Jackal, oh my God. Wow. The Jackal reference. You know, I think that what he said was really was what I was saying too, was at that time I was on to completely different things, and you know, getting into thrash metal, getting into a lot harder stuff, and I think Van Halen was sort of like, oh, that's over here in this sort of pop metal kind of category where I'm listening to a lot harder stuff. So it didn't hit as much as I think it should have with me either, because I was just on to different things.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting time, but I think it's been appreciated a lot more later, especially probably for the older fans of Van Halen. I have a few more comments I did want to touch here. Oh, Kyle?
I just wanted to comment. It might go down in history as one of the most interestingly timed albums of all time.
Good point. We've made the case for it. I would agree.
You know, real quick before you go on to that, I never could understand why they didn't have the title vertically, because it would have made more sense to have it vertically. That way you could see the F.U. right down.
Censorship.
Yeah, like right along the side here or something like that. Yeah,
where you could see that. Like I never could understand that. You know.
I want to say, I think the album look is fantastic. It's got this kind of red, leathery, scaly look to it. It pops. You know, when you see it, you're like, oh, I know what that is. And I also like the new Van Hagar, as we say it, Van Halen logo, which I always thought was kind of cool, the wraparound look to it and stuff like that. So I got a few more Facebook comments here. It says, my good friend Vince Stefanelli is a wonderful contributor to the Hair Metal podcast. Big fan myself. Notorious Bon Jovi disliker. He says, my thought is simple. Meh. He's not a fan. He says, except for Pound Cake, top tune. My friend Shan, who's been a guest on this show, we recently covered the Girls Motley Crue album on an earlier episode of the Hair Metal podcast. She goes, right now was good and impactful, but it had more to do with the video than the song. Interesting. I've heard that before, actually, Kyle, that the video itself was more impactful than the song.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think the video itself carried the impact because you had the visuals to go with it. I think if it was just the song itself, it wouldn't have had the impact. But that's one of those things where you hit that perfect storm. You find the right song and pair it with the right thing, and there you go. You got magic.
Yep. So let's talk about the tour real quick, guys. The tour for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge tour. It was one of the band's longer tours, dividing into 99 dates. It featured shows in Hawaii, Mexico, places Van Halen rarely played in their history. Sammy Hagar chose Alice in Chains to be the opening act after seeing the music video for the hit single Man in a Box. And I thought this was interesting, Kyle, because this was the kind of entry into grunge. And man, Alice in Chains right out of the bat was like, okay, we're here to stay. And putting them on the opening tour, I thought was actually a pretty wise thing to do. Do you remember this?
I do. Honestly, this was one of the huge tours of that year. I mean, and then I'll personally say it. I think the concert album for this tour is basically the Van Halen greatest hits, and it's a phenomenal concert album. It's one of the best concert albums I've ever listened to.
And at the 2 Fresno shows, the band, as you mentioned, filmed and recorded material for the live double album Right Here, Right Now, and the live Van Halen Right Here, Right Now live, also released on Laserdisc. Yay, Laserdisc and DVD. Promotion of these live works was the foundation for the band's next tour. Now, the tour included the song Jump in the set list. The song 1984 had been the band's the song from 1984 had been the band's only U.S. Hot 100 #1 hit. And in this attempt to forget the band's past, Sammy Hagar had refused to sing it when he joined the band in 85. Now an established member in the lineup, he agreed to sing it more often. This tour also marked the first time that keyboards were not performed live on stage by Eddie Van Halen. Keyboard and piano parts were performed off stage by Night Ranger guitarist Alan Fitzgerald. Did you know that, Mike? I did not know this.
I did not know at all. I did not know that at all, that there was a Night Ranger guy playing keyboards backstage. I've always wondered, such a weird dynamic of being off stage. Ozzy has his piano player, keyboard player off stage as well. I never could understand that. Why they're not just on stage. What's the conversation like? Hey, listen,
Kyle,
we need you, but stay on, but you're not going to be on stage.
You know, Kyle.
I want to address the jump aspect of this tour.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. Sammy started playing Jump during this tour. Go.
I want your guys' opinion. Hearing Sammy perform it because he is the better vocalist. I think that. For me, he is, between him and David Lee Roth. Again, it's showmanship, but I think Sammy is the better vocalist. I actually prefer Sammy Hagar's version of Jump. It might be sacrilege, but and I guess it also too how it ties in with the album. I think has a little bit to do with that, because he starts playing it and he's just yelling at the crowd, "This is for you," and then he goes right into it, and it really gets you up even that much higher. Plus, it's how they perform. The performances and the musicianship on this album for a live concert is just phenomenal.
You know, I will answer that and say, you know, that song has one of the most memorable intros with the keyboards that in music history. And it's so iconically Dave that every time I think of it, I can't, man, Kyle, that's a tough question. I'd have to listen to Sammy a little bit more play it. I remember he did play it when I saw them in concert. But it's just one of those things where, like, he did it well enough to where it was really, really good. But I'd have to listen to his version a little bit more to make an educated decision of that, because that song is just so Dave. What do you think, Mike?
It's a Dave song. I mean, Sammy's such a gifted singer. I've always thought that the best Dave era song that Sammy would sing was "Ain't Talking About Love."
Right.
I think that's the best. I think that's the best one. It just fit him a little bit better.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Whereas Jump and some other things that he did, You Really Got Me. Those are just so iconically Dave that you just can't do it. I can't even imagine Sammy singing Hot for Teacher. They probably never played it live with Sammy because there's certain songs that it's just not going to work with him.
Yeah.
Well, I did worked, but there's other ones that just you can't mess with Dave.
Kyle.
I just want to say too, on the Right Here Right Now album, there are just some great cuts from things Sammy said and things they did in the middle of the concert. Even on the album, Michael Anthony gets a guitar bass. They give him a bass guitar solo too on the Jack Daniels bass.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the first part of the tour, guys. In what was it, 91 here. So from August through December, this was the set list that they played. It was Pound Cake, Judgment Day, Spanked, Run Around, When It's Love, There's Only One Way to Rock, Sammy's song, bass solo, drum solo, AFU Naturally Wired, Panama, Why Can't This Be Love, Finish What You Started, Eagles Fly, Hagar tune, guitar solo, Best of Both Worlds, I Can't Drive 55, Hagar, The Dream Is Over, Jump, You Really Got Me, and they ended off with Top of the World. Now, changes a little bit in January through May of 92. Pound Cake, Judgment Day, Run Around, When It's Love, There's Only One Way to Rock, bass solo, Pleasure Dome, drum solo, Panama, Right Now, Why Can't This Be Love, Finish What You Started, Give to Live, guitar solo, You Really Got Me, I Can't Drive 55, Best of Both Worlds, Top of the World, Jump, and The Dream Is Over. Interesting last song there.
It seems it's like they're moving away from big time away from the Dave songs. Would they have three Dave songs in the second set list, you said?
Yeah.
They only have 3 Dave songs. So it seems like they're really moving away from that.
But they had the strength of the Sammy Hagar era's albums and songs to do that. And when you talked about this era of Van Halen is a great summer band, like half the songs on 5150 are just great songs to listen to while you're driving, either the top down or the windows open, and it definitely feels that way. Right Here, Right Now tour, guys. This was released, and they had their tour from March 93 through August 93. And the song list on this, I just want to list these off real quick. Disc 1 was Pound Cake, Judgment Day, When It's Love, Spanked, Ain't Talking About Love, In and Out, Dreams, Man on a Mission, Ultra Bass, Pleasure Dome, drum solo, Panama, Love Walks In, and Run Around. And then on disc 2, Right Now, One Way to Rock, Why Can't This Be Love, Give to Live, Finish What You Started, Best of Both Worlds, 316, You Really Got Me / Cabo Wabo, Won't Get Fooled Again, Jump, and Top of the World. I went out and bought this, guys. Did you get this album, Kyle?
Yes, I most definitely got this album. This is like I said, this album on its own is one of my all-time favorite albums.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much fun. Like I said, the concert takes that they pull from it are amazing. There's one really great one with Sammy Hagar talking about how all the boys in the band were partying and he didn't know about it, and it was as he's going into Right Now, and there's just some great takes in it. Every band member gets a moment in it too, which is great. And you can just hear the energy of the crowd. And on the album, they close out with Top of the World. And it's my favorite version on an album of Top of the World.
What about you? Go ahead, Kyle. Sorry.
I was just going to say, because the energy on it is even more so than just even the energy on the recording of it.
Gotcha. What about you, Mike? Did you get this one too?
I'm gonna swing the pendulum the other way. I am a live album hater, and it's not just Van Halen. It's not just this album. I just do not get live albums. I don't know what it is. I never could understand. It just never was me. I can't. There's only a couple songs I can listen to that are live versions of songs, and they'll come on the radio, and I'll immediately turn off a live version of a song. It's something about it. It just never clicks with me. I'm always thinking, why would I listen to this and not the the studio version, unless it's remarkably different, unless it's but I just never can understand listening to a live album. I don't know why that is. It just never really clicks with me.
Okay, I got thoughts on that. But Kyle, you got something?
I think with this album, because they were doing recording the movie version of this at the same time, it's got
wait, the what version?
The concert video.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay,
the concert video of this. It's got some of the best sound quality I've ever heard on a live album. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm with you, Mike. Most of the time, there's live performances. I'm like, yeah, but this one just sounds amazing.
A concert video, I'm in. I'm totally in on a concert video. But listening to the concert, to me, maybe it's a jealousy thing. Like, I wish I was there.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to chime in on here real quick. First of all, Mike, I think you and I were born as brothers and then separated, because I cannot stand live concert albums either. I bought this one though out of curiosity, because I really wanted to hear these songs that were early Van Halen songs that Hagar didn't do, and I wanted to see it. And plus, I saw the concert, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I cannot stand hearing people cheering in a song that I want to listen to. Find it the most annoying. And one of my biggest issues with I Want You to Love Me, or I Want You to Want Me by Cheap Trick, is it's always the live version that you hear. And I love that song, but I can't stand hearing people in the background going, yay. I want the studio track.
I have to disagree with you on that one. On that one, I have to disagree with you. I Want You to Want Me is better live. And so are the Peter Frampton songs, right? So
it's funny you say that, because Peter Frampton's live might be an exception. I will be right there, but I love. For me, I don't want to hear people singing it, but there's a few live albums I think in history you could say, okay, that is better than the studio album, or it is.
Right.
But in general is what I'm talking about. I cannot stand live albums. So you and I are on that as well.
Like I said, concert video, I'm totally in.
Right. Well, that's what was cool. That was cool about a lot of the hair metal songs that we like, was that they would release, but you would hear the studio track, not the live version, but they would be on tour singing the songs, and they would be syncing up, of course, the studio track to the live video. And that's what, bands like Cinderella and Bon Jovi did really, really well. They showed a lot of them in concert and made you want to go to it and stuff like that. Yeah. But this was the tour that I did see myself. I have a picture of my ticket stub right there. And look who opened up for Van Halen. Vince Neil's band opened up for Van Halen. It was a very good show. Really enjoyed it. And I remember specifically, and he probably said it more than once, that when it was time for Sammy to put on a guitar, he says, to put on a guitar in this album, or excuse me, to put a guitar on while in this band, you got to have some big balls. Now, did you guys see this tour, Kyle?
I did not see this tour. It did not make its way up to Alaska at the time. So.
Okay. What about you, Mike?
No, I'm trying to think of the last time that I saw Van Halen. And I think the last time I saw Van Halen was on Monsters of Rock.
Gotcha.
I don't think I saw them after that. It just, it's that time period of, at this point, I'm going to see Testament and Slayer and, getting into the harder stuff. Whether they came into that, I was at college in 91. So I was a broke college kid. I saw the ticket prices as $33. I would have not had $33 in college.
Gotcha. Well, this was my time to see Sammy Hagar, and I was curious about him. I was, of course, a fan of these albums, and they put on a great show. I did enjoy Vince Neil. He had a good band backing him up. That was fun too. But just seeing in Southern California, seeing this show in Southern California, it was kind of like a home show for them. A lot of the home fans were there, and it was a really good. I saw him at the Pacific Amphitheater on August 28th, 1993. And this actually was one of the last shows of this particular tour before I think they went on and did some stuff later on. So it was nice to see this tour, and it was just a great show. I really, really enjoyed it. Guys, any thoughts on the tour 5150 and the promotion of it before we get into Sammy's upcoming tour?
No, I just wish I would have seen it.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about, you know, all those concerts that we missed, when you think, man, I really should have went out and saw that. You know?
Yeah.
And you know, life gets in the way, but you know, there's so many times where you think I should have seen that. I should have seen that. That's probably one that, you know, when you think about Eddie being gone, you think, nuts, I should have saw him a lot more than I did.
Yeah, that is the question that does come up now. You know, these people that have passed away, you wish you had done that. And all I can say is to young people now is get a chance to see the artists that you like live at least once. And there's still a lot of bands out there I've never seen that I want to see. One of them being I've never seen Judas Priest live. I need to see Judas Priest.
Oh wow, they still sound so they're amazing still.
Yeah. So I did want to throw one little kind of Van Halen trivia out there because I'm a big movie fan. Kyle and I cover movies extensively here on the Fandom Podcast Network. We have a podcast called Couch Potato Theater where we discuss one movie in detail. And sometimes we have fun with the anniversaries. You know, this movie's 30 years old, 40 years old. We pay attention to that. We also have a podcast called Time Warp where we look an entire year of movies and do individual podcasts about each separate months with all the pop culture and music thrown in between. But when I was going down a rabbit hole of Van Halen after he passed away, because we did do a tribute Van Halen podcast after he passed away, make sure you check that out in audio form on the network. I came across some trivia about a movie called The Wildlife. And for those of you that don't know, this is kind of a lost hidden gem that was it was technically an unofficial sequel to Fast Times at Richmond High. And it was also written by Cameron Crowe. And it was about a bunch of high school teens in Southern California. And it starred Chris Penn and Jenny Wright and Leah Thompson and Eric Stoltz. And it's kind of like this little hidden gem. But what's also interesting about this album is its soundtrack. Bananarama, Peter Case, Charlie Sexton, Andy Summers, 3 O'Clock, Edward Van Halen. And the reason why I bring up Edward Van Halen was the soundtrack was composed and recorded by Eddie Van Halen. Only 3 future Van Halen songs ever came from the music in this movie. One is Good Enough from 1986 release 5150. The second is Right Now from the 1991 release of For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. The other, Blood and Fire, didn't appear until 2012's A Different Kind of Truth album. It's interesting how Eddie Van Halen holds on to things when he knows something is good. I highly recommend this movie. It is a great Southern California teens in high school. It is a great double bill with Fast Times at Richmond High. It is available on DVD. You can purchase it. And for those of us that watch Near Dark, love Jenny Wright, wondered whatever happened to her, she has a good role in this.
What year?
Mike, did you know about this? Did you know about this movie?
No, I know. What year was that? I mean, I don't even ever think I've seen the
came out in, what was it, 84? I think it was
84.
Yeah, 84.
Yeah,
and we will be discussing a little bit more because this year of our Time Warp podcast, we're going to be looking at the movies of 1984 because next year in 2024, everything is going to be 40 years old. So make sure you check it out. It's definitely a fun movie and it's got a great soundtrack. Even the other songs on there that Eddie doesn't do. So yeah, check it out, guys. So one of the things I want to discuss is this upcoming tour here with Sammy Hagar and the band that he has backing him up. Joe Satriani, Jason Bonham, and of course, Michael Anthony are going on the Sammy Hagar 2024 tour called The Best of All Worlds. Opening band is Loverboy. And as I said earlier, Sammy was saying he was kind of upset that no one did a Van Halen tribute concert. Now, of course, this is his tour. He's getting these guys. It's almost, and I want to ask you real quick, Mike, about the band's Chicken Foot, which was basically everyone except for Jason Bonham because they had Chad from Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Mm-hmm.
What is your thoughts on this upcoming tour? Do you think you might check it out?
Yeah, I was looking at the dates. I think there's a Holmdel, New Jersey one, which is near me. It's about 40 minutes away. I don't think there's a Philly date, but I also think there's a Pittsburgh date. So I may check that out too, depending on where that is. Pittsburgh has one of the worst concert venues on the planet.
What's it called?
It's called it's like Star Lake Pavilion. It's one of those where it's a pavilion and then the lawn behind it, right? But it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
There's one way in and one way out. So hold up for the show. But I would like to see it depending on where it was. I mean, Satriani is the perfect one to do Eddie, I think. But at the same time, it's like, like I was saying before, do you want to see them do it and the whole time be thinking, I wish it was Eddie? And you're never going to have that, of course, but I just don't know how it's going to go. I think this is one of the things that I will probably do. I'll watch somebody's YouTube video on the concert and decide if it's something I want to see.
Yeah. Kyle, what are your thoughts on Sammy Hagar doing this tour to pay tribute to Eddie Van Halen and bringing in these really talented musicians to do it?
I think everybody's heart is in the right place on this, and I think there's a lot of people who will very much enjoy this because it's kind of maybe their way to close the book a little bit on Van Halen. But not having Alex be part of this, not having Wolfgang be part of this is going to, I think you've got to have one of them be part of this at some point. And because I don't think people will look at it as really a official, even though Michael Anthony's there, Sammy's there, it's not, if you don't have a Van Halen in this, it's just not quite the same. I mean, I know that the concert is starting and actually in Florida, and one of the first shows is in Tampa, but it's in July in the Tampa Amphitheater, which is an outdoor amphitheater in July in Tampa to go see a concert outdoors.
Yeah.
Are you saying you're getting old, Kyle? Because I feel you.
You thought the Raiders game we went to was bad by the end of the
Yeah, that Tampa game. Well, yeah, you're right. The tour starts in July of 2024, goes through Florida, then it goes through Georgia, and this is all through July. You got Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, New York, Sarasota Springs, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Ohio, Toronto, Ontario, and then August you got Michigan, Illinois, Las Vegas, Colorado, Washington, and then towards the end of the tour here in August you've got Washington, several dates in California. You got Wheatland, Concord, Los Angeles, which is the 19th of August. I'm going to look at that one. I might be interested in doing that one. Then it goes to Arizona, Texas, a couple of dates, and then Arkansas. There is some other dates that announced afterwards in Cincinnati, Nashville, Indianapolis, or Indiana, and St. Louis as well. I think, and also too, guys, I've been posting some stuff, some conflicting reports about, and I think a lot of it might be clickbait. So there's reports that he has invited Dave to join on some songs and stuff like that, but not like be a full-on member. And then there's some saying that no, they hate each other, it's not going to happen. I think those are the clickbait ones. I would personally love it if David came in and played with Sammy on some of these old ones. And when it comes to Alex and Wolfgang, I think it might happen. I think Sammy is trying to kind of bury some hatchets here and kind of start a healing process. And I think that if he can get some of these people just to guest at some of these shows, I think it would really go a long way in just saying, let's put the bullshit aside and let's celebrate this wonderful musician and these songs. And that's why I'm seriously looking at going to this, because I would love to see these guys play live. And I've seen Joe Satriani play live,
Oh, he's phenomenal.
Yeah, he's great. And I think this would just be a fun tour for fans. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I a couple of things. I think you're right, Kyle. It doesn't feel like a Van Halen tribute because there's no Van Halen in it. There's not one Van Halen in it, right? So I think that's it. the other thing is concert tickets prices are so ridiculous now.
Yeah.
I mean, something like this, my wife and I would both want to go to. So you're thinking, all right, it's already $300, and we haven't even parked or got anything else, right? So something like this, it would really have to pull me in. And to be honest with you, it's a Sammy band. It's just Sammy Hagar. Like, I'm not paying money to see Michael Anthony. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm just not paying money to see him. Satriani, I would go see at a local show here at a 1,000 seat place. So it's just not hitting me in. It's just not hitting me in all the right areas in terms of I'm going to see Sammy just sing Van Halen songs and not want anybody else from Van Halen is going to be there.
That's understandable.
I don't think there's any chance that Dave shows up to any of these.
No, Dave's not going to show up. Let me ask you this though: how would you feel if Wolfgang was part of this whole tour?
I'd be there.
Yeah, I would be.
If it was Wolfgang, and let's say it's Wolfgang, I don't know how well Wolfgang can play those songs on guitar. Are you saying he's going to be the guitarist or the bass player? He can't be.
I would think they'll probably have him do a little bit of both.
Okay, so let's just say it's Hagar, Anthony, Satriani, Wolfgang, and Alex. I'm 100% there. You could not keep me away.
If no Alex, would you still be as interested?
No, because Wolfgang isn't as important to me as Alex.
Yeah,
he's not, because he wasn't there for all the. I mean, did Wolfgang do any major Van Halen songs or albums? Like, he wasn't really a part of that. So, I mean, I would be more willing to go see it if it was Sammy, Mike, Alex, and Satriani. I would go see it.
I think we will see some guest spots by some of whether it's Alex or Wolfgang. I'm an optimist, though. I would love to see David Lee Roth come up there, because I think that if he were to share a stage and sing some of these original songs by Van Halen with Sammy right there, that would be huge. But you know Kevin, how huge that. Kevin, and if I was at that show, like what if it happened in LA, because it's an LA based band? That would be huge, man. How cool would that be?
It would be amazing. It would be unbelievably cool. But I think you answered your own question when you said Dave sharing a stage with Sammy. Dave has never shared a stage with anybody.
I know. I hope that they can humble themselves and look at, the person that they're celebrating that's no longer with them, that is the reason why they were in these bands in the first place. And I think that hopefully fans that are split down the middle or one way or the other can kind of come going, man, that was pretty cool. Even if it just happens for one show, that it's out there, we can see it on YouTube and share it and maybe talk about it. And hopefully maybe we can come back and discuss that. Maybe we'll see what happens. So, yeah.
It would have just been better. It would have just been better if they would have just done a tribute show.
Yeah.
Everybody out, did it at the Hollywood Bowl, something like that, somewhere in LA, because they're an LA band, and just brought everybody out. I mean, even throw Gary Sharon a bone.
Yeah. All right, guys, let's wrap this up. This is the Hair Metal Podcast, and we, of course, have been discussing For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, 1991. And let's just go ahead and start with you, Kyle, because you brought this to the table. This is an important album for Van Halen fans. It was an important album at the time. Give me your final thoughts on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge.
I think For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge and everything that went around it is one of the apexes of Van Halen's career. I mean, again, you almost have to look at it as two different bands: Van Halen Roth, Van Halen's Hagar. This is definitely the apex of Van Halen Hagar. I honestly do believe, from musicianship, it is the apex for the band, and I think that's because of Sammy Hagar and the freedom he gave Eddie and Alex in their performances as well, where you didn't have David and his antics kind of keeping some people down a little bit. I think it's a revolutionary album that's in a unique time period where I think it was kind of the one of the last true hurrahs of that era of hair metal before we got into grunge and hip hop and gangster rap and everything like that. And it stands out in this unique time frame for an amazing music video, for some great songs on the album, for probably pop culture wise Van Halen's biggest awareness within the pop culture and the lexicon at that time. And I think in truth too, we've talked about it here, Van Halen is a band of the ages, and there's two different versions of it. And I think with this album, it's the apex of one version, and it's a phenomenal apex. It's a fun album, in my opinion, and I just think it really cemented Van Halen as a legendary band of all time, because they survived two different incarnations and were incredibly successful with both incarnations.
Well said, Kyle. Mike, your final thoughts on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge?
Yeah, I think when you think of Van Halen, it's always that Sam versus Dave thing, and this album is so polished and so well done, and the musicianship is so off the charts amazing. It's hard not to hold it at high standard. I'm a big fan of things being raw, in the sense of you hear that first Van Halen's album and you hear how hungry and raw they are. You don't hear that in this one, but that doesn't take away from it. It's because the songs and the hooks are so catchy that you forget about it just not being that raw anymore. It's like when you're little and your mother makes you a hamburger and you think it's the best hamburger ever, and then as you grow up and you go out to have a gourmet hamburger and you say, no, this is the best hamburger ever. They're both still great hamburgers, but you look at them differently, and you can't ever say this is the best, Dave, this is Dave and Sammy. It's sort of like arguing who's the best Saturday Night Live cast ever. It's just there's no right answer, because they're all different. So this album is, when I was listening to it, just when we started talking about this, I had my nose stuck up at it a little bit of thinking, it just doesn't hit. But then after listening to it for a while, and you sort of take away that feeling of it's not Dave, you get a new perspective of it.
It's a good point. That's a good point. Kyle, I have a confession to make. When you first brought this to my attention, I'm like, oh yeah, I would love to talk about that album. For whatever reason, I thought it came out in like 94 or 95. I got my years mixed up because it felt like it came out later until I started doing the research on it. I'm like, that's a 91 album. That's like the end of hair metal, pretty much. 92. There was a few things that genre was missing up, was starting to go away. Grunge was coming in, but it felt like this band with Hagar at the helm was kind of timeless in a way with the sound. I mean, I felt like this was a mid to late 90s album, right? Don't you think?
Yeah, and I think that's some of the genius of that particular album is that it kind of crossed over, and yes, it has.
It doesn't feel like an early 90s, album at all.
No, it has some of that aspects of classic hair metal, but because of just their amazing music, where they were at such an apex as musicians at this point that they were able to transcend.
Yeah.
Just being in a time frame, and that's what I think that's the thing about this album. Is this album almost feels like it could be reflective of it could come out at any time and it would be reflective of it.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
I wonder if you think that, Kevin, because it sounds so different than 80s Van Halen.
Yeah, it does.
You're separating that era so much that you thought it came out later because it sounds so different.
Yeah, that's why I was like, and I hadn't listened to the album all the way through in quite a while. Every now and then I would hear Pound Cake or, Top of the World or, Right Now. But I was just like, this is 91. I'm like, wow. I was still going to like other hair metal concerts at the time, and of that era, as they say. And so, yeah, I just, it's a great album. And Kyle, I appreciate you bringing that to the table. So we've been celebrating Van Halen for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. And of course, we discussed the upcoming Sammy Hagar tour. And we had a little discussion, of course, about Sammy Hagar versus David Lee Roth. Great discussion there. And I want to thank everyone in the Hair Metal podcast group for contributing to that. If you're listening to this, please check out the video. We've been putting up slides and showing pictures. And please subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please share and also join our Hair Metal Podcast Fandom group. It's on Facebook. Make sure you check that out and check out the rest of the network too. We got a lot of fun stuff going there. Kyle, let's start with you, sir. How can we find you? Thank you so much for bringing this to the table. Appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate you for letting me bring it to the table. And of course, you can find me all around the Fandom Podcast Network on all of our great shows and on the Fandom Podcast Network Facebook page. You can find me as Kyle Wagner on Facebook. You can find me on X/Twitter/ whatever it'll be in the coming weeks at Kyle W. And you can find me on Threads and Instagram at Kyle Fandom.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for, first of all, making this early morning podcast after seeing Kiss all night. But thank you so much for discussing some Van Halen, man. Where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me on the Fandom Podcast as well. You can find me on Facebook as Michael Simmer. You can find me teaching heavy metal all this week at my school. It's heavy metal week at our school.
Oh, that is so awesome. What are you touching on?
Well, we do the whole genre. We do last week was shock rock. We did Alice Cooper and Kiss, which it just worked out that way.
Nice.
So I'm sure on Monday the kids are going to want to see a bunch of pictures from the Kiss concert. This week we go into it's a chronological curriculum, and right now we're in the birth of heavy metal. So I am trying to carry the torch. I'm trying to carry the torch and expose these kids to metal. And every year I turn at least 2 kids onto metal, which is I'm doing the Lord's work of exposing the kids to heavy metal that they've never had before. So hopefully turning new metalheads every day.
You don't know how much I appreciate you doing that, man. Thank you so much. And what's really cool about this is that they're going to remember this, and whether they will show their appreciation now or later, they're going to remember you, and they're going to go, I remember that band. That had this awesome teacher, blah, blah, blah. So well done. That's very
I've run into them at concerts. I've run into the kids at concerts and say, I'm here because of you, which
there
is
you go.
Really cool. Yeah.
Again, for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, Van Halen, my name is Kevin Reitzel. You can find me on Twitter, now X, also on Instagram and Threads at Spartan_Phoenix. And please, you can also check me out. You can find me in the Hair Metal Podcast Fandom group. I'm sharing a bunch of fun stuff there. And check out the network as well. Please look at Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube, and all of our audio podcasts can be found at fpnet.podbean.com. Kyle, thanks again, sir. Appreciate you.
It's always good to be here. It's always fun to be on some hair metal. Rock on, man. Rock on.
Mike, I'm looking forward to our next podcast about drafting our 1989 supergroup. We'll talk more about that later.
It'll be a lot of fun. Yeah.
Wait, guys. You're gonna have that draft. I can foresee it getting ugly when somebody takes a musician a pick ahead of your draft pick.
It's gonna be interesting to see who picks first. We'll have to figure out who does that. But we're gonna have some fun with that, and I'm gonna put that out to the Hair Metal Podcast group and get their super group thing. So we'll talk more about that later. Again, thank you to Michael. Thank you to Kyle. I'm Kevin. Join us again next time here on the Fandom Podcast Network for the next episode of the Hair Metal Podcast, where we'll tease our hair with Aquanet, slip on those tight ripped jeans, leather pants, or lip service attire, if you know, you know, and rock out in that leather motorcycle jacket. Remember, every rose has its thorn, and on a steel horse we will ride. Hair metal lives. Rock on, everyone.